Okay, so we are testing the live stream at this moment. Just waiting for Desmond to finish setup so we would be able to check his video and audio quality. Desmond, we are expecting two other panelists, one from Jamaica, the other from Belize. But we will start promptly at 9, whether all the panelists are here or not. So as soon as you're ready for us to do the technical checks with you, we'd quite appreciate that. So we are live on our YouTube channel for the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute at the moment. This is the testing stage of the live to ensure that the live stream is stable and running well. And today, this is an impromptu session because we have, as you can see on the screen, a really critical discussion to be had, and that is the implications of social media. So today we'd be looking at whether platforms such as Twitter, now known as X, should be banned from other countries. So it's going to be quite a discussion this morning, and I look forward to more persons joining the live stream as well.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know if this is good, yeah?
Much better. But I need you to bring down the screen because we're just seeing a little piece of you here, and there's a lot of white space above your head. Is it possible to get more of you? Much better.
Okay.
A little more, a little more, a little more. Right, yes.
All right, no problem.
Yes, you're positioned there properly. Okay, good. And we are hearing you well, so that augurs well. Looking for Sonia to join us now, but not seeing her yet.
Good morning, all.
Hi, Jason. We're barely hearing you, actually.
Oh,
Oh,
I have
Jason.
my microphone the wrong way. Am I doing better now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Additionally, could you put some more light to the front of you, or
Yes, I
because
can.
it's showing quite dark.
Still dark?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yeah.
let me unblur then, and I think that will help a lot. Is that any better, or do I need to get a spotlight?
It's better. Still not ideal. Is there?
I have a solution. I have one more solution. Just a moment.
Nice. All right.
Just letting you know, in the background, we're reaching out to Sonia, right?
Yes, I also sent her a WhatsApp message, but haven't seen her respond or seen the message as yet. But
Okay, sure.
yeah, that's okay. We will start, and because the challenge we have with these sessions would be the fact that it's a different time zone. So making sure she had the correct time zone is important.
I think this is the best I'm going to be able to do.
Okay, well, we would live with it. The only thing I would ask, Jason, there's a lot of space above your head. Could we see a little more of you if you center it down?
That it's kind of a high or a low. I don't have a middle standpoint.
Okay. Okay. Well, no, if that's the best that we can
this
get.
This is the best that I can do.
Right. So let me just do a quick check with you though. Amelia, can we now take down the flyer and let me see what Jason looks like when he's fully spotlit? Okay, right. Yeah, so then that
I'm
definitely.
not seeing your well,
You're not seeing what, Amelia?
sorry
Hey,
about that.
Sonia.
Guys,
Nice to have you. So, Sonia, can I also ask for you? We'd like to see a little more of you. Like right now, we just seen from here.
yeah, trying to set up
Lower
now
the
the
screen.
computer and the Wi-Fi. Just give me a sec. Yeah.
Okay. So, good morning to all of our attendees who have joined us in our Zoom room this morning. Today's session. Oh, excellent, Jason. Whatever magic you did, suddenly we are seeing you very well. So,
Happy to have you.
yes, nice. Okay, so we will be getting started in just a few seconds as we finish our technical checks. Right, Sonia, that looks excellent. So, nice, yes, and I'm getting good a good video feed from you as well as the audio. All right, and Desmond, let's just get a quick audio test with you again too.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Hear me clearly?
Awesome. Yes, great. Okay, so then all of our panelists are ready to go. And so we can start here this morning in what is an impromptu discussion, as I shared a short while ago with persons who had entered our room. So I am Kamala Rampersad de Silva, Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. Today, we are live as we discuss the implications of social media. Should it be banned? Why are we having this conversation? For one thing, just a few days ago, we learned that the High Court in Brazil banned X, which is the platform formerly known as Twitter, of Brazil. And it is a serious ban. It is not just that the platform is banned, but also if Brazilian citizens choose to use the platform, they can be fined. So the High Court has been pretty serious about ensuring that the law is observed. Why did Brazil take this important step? And I just want to share with you a few points before I invite our panelists this morning to speak. There has been a number of issues over the years with respect to the use of social media. More so, there has been the concern with respect to whether, in fact, the information can be trusted. And that was one of the key issues coming out of Brazil. The level of disinformation that exists within the society. And there were at least 3 different challenges that were posed to the Brazilian society. Misinformation, disinformation, but more so using social media for fraudulent means. And basically subversion of the national election process. So very serious and important implications for how your society is run. Now, generally, we have found as small states, the Caribbean region, a lot of changes that are happening globally are moving at such a fast pace. It certainly feels like it's outside of our control. More so, there's been this challenge for us to also get on board. And we discuss it here at the CCGI as well. The evolving area of artificial intelligence and the implications of this technology and the importance for us to use this technology if it is we want to have a competitive advantage. However, for several years now, there has been a lot of studies and research that published social media on the whole has a lot of negative implications. Among these is it's addictive. It impacts brain development. It is something that we need to address as our young people in particular use social media. So I'm hoping that today's discussion, we take charge of understanding what is the environment we want, whether it's within our business, within our families? What is the type of controls we want in our society in order that we too can take a measure control rather than feel that we are being battered in all directions and need to jump on this bus and let it take us, even if it means huttling over a river into some destructive space? Is it possible us in the Caribbean region to also look at implications of some of these social media and consider banning it? We have three really wonderful people, very experienced in their own areas, that are going to bring some of their perspectives to share as well. And I'm going to introduce each of the three of them before I invite them to speak. So I will start with Sonia. And Sonia, of course, is joining us from Belize. Her name is Sonia Ceballos. And Sonia, I'm hoping I pronounced your name correctly. She's joining us for the first time here at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute as a panelist. Now, throughout her career in telecoms, in digital transformation and innovation, and now as an entrepreneur, Sonia has brought a passion for excellence to all her tasks and projects over the last 20 plus years. She's been exposed to the development capabilities of digital transformation and technology at multiple levels. Her belief is that the right approach to teamwork and to individual development can work wonders of transformation, even beyond what the technology itself brings to the table. And Sonia, this is something that I absolutely love. So I can't wait to hear your perspective as we talk about the implications of social media. Our next panelist I want to introduce very briefly as well is Mr. Desmond Lawrence. Desmond is an accomplished professional with a background in media, education, and communications. He's a well-known radio personality, broadcaster, a former television host and presenter. He's an educator who has taught at all levels of the education system in Trinidad and Tobago, and also lectures at one of the leading tertiary institutions in the region. He has worked as an independent consultant for various organizations in Trinidad and Tobago in the areas of marketing, communications, and public relations, and has facilitated workshops focused on public speaking, business communication, broadcasting, and entrepreneurship. And more so, he sits on the board of the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, HRMAT, where he serves as the Director of Public Relations. And now I'd like to introduce our third panelist, and this is Jason Facey. Now, Jason is someone who is very dear to me, and I am so happy that he has chosen to join us for today's discussion. Jason is a young attorney at law out of Jamaica. And I have asked Jason to join us for today's discussion, not so much for his background in his professional capacity as a lawyer, but because we would like to hear his perspective as a young person, a millennial who would have experienced this technology very differently from persons like Desmond and Sonia and myself. And so we would be really interested to hear his take on how he sees the implication of social media in his country of Jamaica and wider so here in the Caribbean region. So I want to start by asking Sonia to share some of her thoughts, after which we'll go to Desmond and then Jason. So Sonia, I love the fact that you've been working in the digital telecommunication space, particularly with respect to transformation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts this morning.
Thank you very much. And I'm very excited to be here. As you say, there is a lot of aspects that we need to look and consider with talking about social media, correct? So I always divide it in three main aspects. First is the benefits, correct? Because there are benefits. Then we can look at the drawbacks and risk. So what is that also this is bringing? And then I like always to look at the ethical and social considerations. So those are the three aspects that I like to analyze from the perspective of social media and actually any technology, because we can be the same analogy with AI, with machine learning and all the technologies that are arriving. So I always try to do the comparison, like is a maybe easy one for people to understand. Before we were used to ride horses and we now ride cars. So life is just a set of transformation. So, and I'm not the person who will say we can stop the transformation. What we need to see is how can we adapt it, considering these three aspects, correct? The benefits, the drawbacks, the risk, and of course, also the ethical and social considerations. So if we think a little bit about the benefits, correct? So globalization, open markets, development of economy, information sharing. So I think people like us who has been living in the two different eras, correct? So we know the before and we know the after. So we of course can see how social media has changed our perspective in life regarding to our personal life and regarding our business life, correct? So how much our business has improved, how much we became for especially countries like Belize, who is so small. So how could we go for a very small market to be global, to be knowing everything that happened every second? So I think the community building, correct? The ability to connect, to increase, to learn, all that benefits are there, and I think we cannot deny them, correct? Of course, it's important to see also the drawbacks and the risk, correct? And I think one of the ones we all very concerned is about the privacy, correct? So how far and how much private that is, where your data is getting stored, who is controlling your data. Actually, when I was living in Belgium in 2005, we did the first impact study of technologies at that time. And at that time, we were talking about not even close where we are today. And we say something that always has stayed in my brain is whoever's control the data will control the world.
Yes.
Because if you see social media today, you can influence basically any decision, from what I'm going to purchase this morning to the point who I'm going to vote for to who I'm going to relate to. So a lot of that decisions are not taken anymore by us, are taken by somebody else who influence those decisions on us. So privacy go more than I want to share when I'm staying. I want to share I'm traveling, because at the end that's your own decision. But it's also about where is that data getting stored and who is using that data for making you to make your next decision. So I think in there, it is important. You mentioned before the mental health impact. Very important. I think we've seen even movies now, we've seen people has to go now to the mental care because of addictions and impacts, no? And then you have cyberbullying, harassment and all that of course come also to expose. Now you get exposed to more ways and different ways, anonymous ways to get exposed, to get these kinds. And the last one that I always like to mention is the ethical and social considerations. Because, okay, we can talk about freedom of speech, correct? So till which point I will stop you saying what you need to say, because, you know, you are now, you reach more people and you have to say more. So where is the social responsibility on what I'm able to say? We cannot deny the economic impact, correct? Again, campaigns that before couldn't reach just a few people now can reach larger group, etc. So those aspects are important. So I think that is in general the three main aspects I see with social media, correct? Is the benefits, the drawbacks, and of course the social impact on that. I think we could talk later a little bit about the potential solutions, but I think for me, it is it is not a fact or blocking or unblocking. I think this has been, as I mentioned before with the horses, that's something that you just can't stop. Development, evolution, and transition and transformation is there. We have moved to many eras, and it's not that we can stop it. But what we need to do is how can we find a middle ground and trying to see how can we see the negative impact and how can we try to mitigate it as much as possible so we can have both the benefits but mitigate the risk of introducing social media into our worlds so we can control. And of course, I come from transformation. And when I come from transformation, it's not only about the technical side. Actually, in transformation, our main challenges are culture, people, behaviors, correct? So that's exactly the same with this. You have all this availability of technology, and in particular for this discussion today, social media. So it's how you can understand what is the benefit that bring to you. You can embrace it, but also understand the risk and the consequences of using it and how you can mitigate that. And then, of course, can be done to regulations, can be done to education. I think that we're missing a lot, digital literacy education. And of course, we also should go to the owner of those platforms and talk to them about what is your responsibility here? Because I think that's something I haven't seen much so far, is that they basically let the information flow. Doesn't matter if it's fake, not fake, whatever, and there is no restrictions. There is a little bit of improvement in the last years because of, especially Europe, have been very strict and they had been kind of more follow-up. But I think that these are the three aspects I will look for as a solution is regulations, digital literacy, education. I think that I don't see, at least in Belize, I have seen none about that yet. And then platform responsibility. So that's my insights.
I like that. I think it's a great start, and I agree we would be able to continue the conversation by looking at what may be some of those solutions. But I really love how you have compartmentalized this into three very clear sections as to what our considerations should be. So I appreciate that. I now want to ask Desmond, let's hear his thoughts. We are talking about the implications of social media, and we see that there are benefits, but there are drawbacks as well. Desmond, as an educator in particular, what are your thoughts? And you need to unmute first so that we'd be able to hear you clearly as soon as you get started.
Sorry.
No problem. And just to let everyone know, we are live on our YouTube channel this morning. Many thanks to our social media person, Warren Anderson. So you see, we too here at CCGI understand that there are benefits. So we are using some of the platforms for what we think is the betterment of society. Is it that we just allow it? That's what. Your thoughts now.
First of all, let me say thank you very much for allowing me to be here. It's a very interesting discussion, a pertinent one. My research tells me that, one of the evolving trends as we move forward is that people will be relying more on social media platforms to get their information as opposed to using search engine. And that's actually documented by sites like Hootsuite and so on. So that's a fact. So the discussion becomes even more pertinent as social media's role in the whole communication architecture, particularly as it relates to misinformation and its more sinister cousin disinformation. However, having said all of that, as an educator, as a media specialist for a number of years, I don't agree with banning at all. I think that's the purview of, super ego dictators and neo-fascists. I'm not very much in agreement with that at all. But I do believe that there's need for regulation, and Sonia quite rightly and quite articulately highlighted the point that there is need for regulation. I think, though, the way that we approach it has to be it has to be a collective response. Let us not forget that Brazil is a place that has a population of millions. So that would affect the social media platforms. If we say we're banning it, listen, I know that Elon Musk and his company, of course, that must be of serious concern to them at this point. Trinidad and Tobago, Belize, we don't have those kinds of populations. What I think we can do, I think at the CARICOM level, I think discussions have to be had, and we have to present a united front right? Make up as many people as possible. And I think the numbers is a numbers game essentially. And I think once we do that, we'll have better leverage. I don't think Belize could do it alone, Trinidad and Tobago could do it alone, but we need to have the technocrats, powered by us, the individual states, to come together at the CARICOM level and let's see what we could do to make representation to these companies. So I also take Sonia's point, again, and it supports the notion that I have that it should not be banned at all. I mean, social media, Sonia talked about reaching a wider audience, which is, but I like to think that as well, it also does the opposite. It allows you to personalize content, which augurs well for businesses and even for consumers and customers. There are a number of other benefits. I won't get into that, but I suspect that's going to come out in the discussion. The challenges, of course, as we said, will always lie with the misinformation and disinformation, privacy concerns, mental health. But let's face it, right? Even without social media, we would have had misinformation and disinformation being spread. As a matter of fact, my take is that it would have been even more difficult to find out if certain pieces of information were false or put out to fool people. So again, I think the key lies in regulation. I think as well there must be a serious education campaign, because I think we all have to take some kind of personal responsibility when it comes to social media. When I always hear people talk about the mental health aspect, and don't get me wrong, I think it's a serious issue. Added to which there's whole polarization and so on. But I never hear, or I seldom hear, that any kind of advocacy is being made for people to take personal responsibility. I look at what's going on in Europe and the States and Europe and North America. I know Europe is very heavy on legislation, but you don't ever hear people saying this. You need to take personal responsibility. It's the same as, you're not supposed to eat this because it's going to affect your health. Then you're supposed to eat that less and less. So there has to be some, and of course you can't regulate people's personal lives, but I think a serious education campaign, I'm yet to see anything like that. I'm familiar with what goes on here in Trinidad, obviously Guyana, Barbados, and a couple of the other islands, but as far as the others, I'm not quite sure that I've seen any kind of serious education campaign to make people aware. Listen, this is your responsibility too. You can take responsibility for how much, for how much information you consume, how much time you spend on social media, and of course, the fact checking. How do you go about determining whether this information is false? But there's a piece of misinformation, disinformation. So I think along with the regulation, there has to be a serious Caribbean-wide education campaign. So that's my take on it.
Thank you so much, Desmond. And certainly you have raised some points that's very important for us to discuss. And specifically, I want to look at that area of personal responsibility. So we will get to that. But I like your idea, especially that there be a united front, that we have this conversation so the Caribbean as a region can address, because each of us as small states may be considered small fry. Persons like Elon Musk and have us to consider. At the same time, though, we need to take charge of our own destinies and decide what that environment is going to look like. And there's strength in numbers. So I agree with you. So we are having the conversation. Wonderful. So now I would like to invite this very special young man to join us, because this is a perspective that is so important for us to have as we look at the implications of social media and how do we want to build that environment? What do we want? Jason, how are your friends viewing this as well? I'm excited to hear your contribution. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Kamala. And in fact, I'd like to build off what was said by the other panelists, because I think they've laid the framework perfectly between raising the first instant reaction. Should social media be banned? Anybody in my age bracket or lower is going to say instantly no. Like, it's just a ridiculous question. The benefits, the drawbacks are there. And in fact, it's just a reality that we've known. I, as a millennial specifically, sit in an interesting seat, as we always like to say, that we were here before the internet, and we were here where the internet was still at a stage where it came naturally to us. So we've seen where we're coming from. We've seen where we are now. We can poke holes at both sides, and ultimately, we're now kind of at the age where we're stepping back. We have Gen Z and Alpha behind us. They have their own vernacular, their own such, and all they know are these tools. Is this reality? So any conversation of how do we ban this or live without it is kind of, to use a new turn of phrase, boomeresque, where they're not interested in that in the slightest. That all being said, just to contextualize the conversation, because the only democratic countries that have taken any action against social media platforms are against against Telegram and now X. What's interesting about both of these instances is that they came as a result of the platforms being faced with regulation, being faced with court orders. For X specifically, they were told that they're required to face certain infractions in Brazilian law. They refused to do that. There was a point in time where Musk was participating, had a representative there, and then when he didn't like how it was turning out, the policy of the company, and it's also important to remember that we're talking not about just the town hall and free speech, as the conversation likes to get wrapped up in. We're talking about businesses that are selling data, that are selling ads, that need these impressions, need these eyes. And what are their responsibilities for ethical practice in any jurisdiction? So that's what happened to X, where it was banned in Brazil, and the whole world has kind of taken shock about that. Also recently, the platform Telegram, which is a lot like WhatsApp, if anyone's not familiar with it, they've been, the founder and CEO was arrested recently in France because they have been asking the company, what is your moderation standards? How are you dealing with these proven accounts of spreading misinformation? And Telegram is kind of said, what can you do? We're just a repository. There have been a lot of chinks in that armor recently. There is a case with TikTok where the standard protection of we're just a repository of information has been challenged at a lower court, and they're now being made to answer a case of a unfortunate death of a young girl where the algorithm pushed content to them. And in that instance, they weren't seen as a repository, they were seen as an editor. I say all of that to come to what my point is, and my addition to the panel is that moderation and how you take responsibility, in the words of Desmond, is now critical. How do we actually advance that? It's interesting that Twitter, this is pre-Musk, was lauded as one of the most regulated, observed, content moderated sites. And when the change in ownership happened in 22, that changed. The entire, well, not the entire, but a large part of the content moderation team were fired. And that's why we find ourselves here today. Had that change not happened, and I'm playing games of speculatives here, would we be in the same position? Would we be even having this conversation? There have always been unfortunate stories when it comes to social media, and we see them in our newspaper. There have been fantastic stories, GoFundMes, profit raising, small businesses kind of having an opportunity to put a footmark somewhere. It is an amazing tool, but the world itself is still trying to figure out how do we deal with it. The kids feel that they need to have this social media presence, not realizing how at risk in the woods, unprotected they could be. And it really doesn't matter where you're coming from or what one would expect your protections to be, because it kind of knocks and hits us all personally and individually. I have a couple more stories to share of both the great stories and the bad stories if we have time for it, but I'd want to throw it back to you now, Kamla.
Thank you so much, Jason. And I appreciate that perspective as a millennial, who would have grown with the social media to see how it's impacting, and then the perspective of your friends with respect to that. So Jason says very clearly, no banning. Okay. Which does make sense, but I think if we look at it and we come straight back to Sonia and her explanation, I thought it's a nice visual, so let's explore it. From horses to cars. What did that transition require? From 3 to 4 years old, you can jump on a horse. You can be taught to ride. You can be let alone out in the field. Do we do the same with cars? What is that environment that we developed to allow for the benefit of using cars? Because now you can get there in such a faster time frame without killing the horse. But then what is that environment that we need to create for the safety of those around us? So I will take Jason's point fully on board. Let us not talk about banning as much as there has been that precedent and it opened the doors for us to have that discussion. How then do we build that environment that we want to see to help us take charge of how our society evolves? Now, I want to say this in two contexts. One, for organizations. Because I have been, almost a boomer, almost, Jason. So I have seen the response of organizations to some of these platforms as they evolved. So I've been part of that whole move where Facebook, for instance, is not available in organizations. And that's more so because the organization policy was that Facebook simply wastes time. And we want to control the time for employees while they're within our organizations. And so their firewalls banned access to Facebook. But let's add a more sinister problem that has been looming. And that is the very addictive nature of a lot of these social media tools and the fact that a lot of our young people have no controls. So Sonia, I want to start with you in terms of giving a response before I go to Desmond. I know Desmond spoke about personal responsibility, but we are dealing with something that is highly addictive. Should we be looking at implications and put measures, what kinds of measures, as a matter of fact, not whether we should, what kind, considering that we are saying no to banning?
Yeah, I think I would love to have that answer. But I think that's one of the debates the society has. And I will tell you, it's for me, the addicted part is one problem. But for me, if I see the new generation is impacting our learning ability too, correct? Our analytical thinking. So we used before to read documents and to come back with, resumes, and we read the book and we come back with the analytics and the thinking. And today we also becoming short readers. That's another thing that's happening, correct? So we now use to read things and we get tired, we get disconnected. I always like a book that is called One Thing, because that's happening, and then you are doing something and you get notification of this and you jump over that, and then it takes you time to come back to where you were before. So it's not only the addiction implication, it's, I think, changing complete the human behavior on the way that you are getting educated now. So how deep you go into reading, how analytical you are going with your reading, how much distraction are you having? So something that you used to do before in shorter time takes you longer, and take you longer just because all the distractions that are happening when you're doing the same activity. So all those are aspects that are, for me, are implications on the human being, and especially on the education. Now, how to resolve it? I think part of that is that we have to create certain boundaries. And I think that's a little bit the challenge, because parents are using now technology and as an alliance for you, correct? So you go to a restaurant now, what all kids are doing is are in tablets, correct? So if you go almost anywhere, you go to planes, etc. So when I was a kid, I didn't have that. And I was behaving in the plane. Now, if we don't get the tablet, then the kid doesn't behave. So it is a combination. And again, I would love I have the answer, but I think it's just what we have seen here is a combination of personal responsibility, parental responsibility, school responsibility, government responsibility, in all the boundaries that you need to put around those technologies, and how much we use it, but also how much we understand the potential risk of using these technologies in our own education. And I think even for me, I mean, I'm not talking about only them. I have that challenge of trying to become and remain focused in what I'm doing. So I have to personally do certain actions in order to start being more concentrated and create disturb and all these kind of functionalities, because yes, you get exposed to and something come and you jam. So I think it's part of that multiple combination of boundaries that we will need to put to try to understand till which point we use technology and what is this impacting us. And as I say, it's just more than addiction. For me, the main reason seen is the lack of analytical thinking, the quick notice. I read something very short and I take conclusions out of it. And research, I see, is less research because just people get it so easy. I just click a button, ChatGPT, and I have all the information. So I just take what I get. So I don't research anymore. So all these are aspects that are all together for me to consider. And I think we have to start working together. I think somebody else mentioned it here, from all individual parents, schools, platform owners, government. How can we use it, but also understand the boundaries and the limitation? Again, the analogy with the car, we now have driver license, we have regulation street. So you need to go to a certain point where, yes, you have some, you can go faster now to a place, but those are the boundaries that you have in order to make sure that it's safe, you're okay, and will you arrive to the destination in a proper way. So that's, I think, my insights on this.
Thank you, Sonia. And I appreciate you adding your personal perspective in terms of the challenges you as an individual face, because I want to share as well. Over the last few years, because of the work I do with CCGI, I've not had as much time to go on Facebook, let's say, that I used to several years ago. As a matter of fact, I made an intentional decision that I was going to stop being on Facebook as much, because I was now focusing more of my attention on LinkedIn to grow this professional space. And do you know, I feel guilty when I go on Facebook now and I see my friends posting and I see people wishing each other happy birthday and happy anniversary. And I think I'm such a bad friend. I'm such, not someone who is also paying attention to their lives. And so if I post a photo of me or a photo with friends and I'm out at an event, I post it with like, ooh, I hope people don't mind that I am still, active here, because they'd be like, so she just wants us to like her stuff, but she's not here to also engage with us. And that's a very real situation as well, as individuals in managing this space as adults. So I wanted to just touch a little bit on a comment from Dr. Noek Gowandan in our chat, right? So he says it starts with responsible parenting. And he's saying that state level banning or censorship cannot be a response to this individualistic issue. I want to disagree. And I want to disagree by saying, if we look at the context that our society has created, and Desmond, I'm coming to you with this, right? Because this is a tough one. I'm preparing you. As an educator, and you have seen young people through primary school, secondary school, and then tertiary school. And let me quote from Animal Farm: all people not equal. The environment in which persons are growing, it's not equal. Not everyone has the same resources and support system to allow them to make choices that says, as a responsible parent, this is what I do. We do have a lot of single parent situations in the Caribbean region, and a lot of parenting situations where both parents are fully employed. And therefore, it's a struggle. And this is something that we also need to have a conversation around. How is our society evolving? And is it the way we want to? I think a lot of the depression that our young people face today, and which they blame to a great extent on our generation, and sometimes I think it's for good reason, because we have not sat down and created that environment that we want. We have allowed it to evolve to the point now where a lot of people feel they have no choice in a lot of what's happening around them. And it's survival. People are moving in survival mode. Is that what we want? Now, let's talk about some of the platforms. Jason shared quite a bit on why X was banned in Brazil. So I'm hearing from some young people that the way in which X has evolved following its change from Twitter is you get more pornography than anything else on that platform. So are we going to come to say it's individual responsibility? Are we just going to throw our hands up and say, oh, well, you know, because we want free speech. We want to encourage that people make their own choices. And let us talk about the addictive nature. Listen, it's like sugar in our diet. When you become addicted, you have little self-control over the issue. So we've recognized that with certain types of drugs, and there are laws in place to ensure that you don't have cocaine available to a 5-year-old. This is as bad as having that kind of social media running free throughout our society. What then should be that approach that we as Caribbean people in charge of our cultural heritage, in charge of our young people and growing our minds, and Sonia made a very important point, the learning ability to ensure that we have analytical thinking. How can we move forward knowing all of this? Your thoughts, Desmond?
Oh, well, you've given me quite a handful. There's so many ways I can take this from. But let me start with something I'm very passionate about. I've always made the point. I mean, you talk about analytical skills in the context that, you know, social media, and Sonia made the point that, you know, people are not thinking analytically, and so on and so forth. And that's a fair point. I'm not saying no, but I think that point has only been exacerbated because you already have a curriculum in our secondary schools and even the primary schools that are totally irrelevant to the needs of the modern curriculum. So, right. So I'll give you an example. I was chatting with a teacher the other day, and she was saying that it was an entire discussion, and we were chatting about how we can get about students failing maths. I think that's because CSEC rates would have fallen. I guess you know that, right? And the thing about it is when you examine the curriculum in some subjects, in most subjects, there's very little analytical room to do analytical things. Yes, you have things like SBAs and so on and so forth, but still it's not required. A lot of the curriculum tends to be, listen, you learn this and you regurgitate at an exam, right? Probably if they get on to 2A levels, might be a little more analytical. If they go beyond that, might be a little more analytical. So I think, even though I might agree with Sonia I do think you have to juxtapose that against the reality of what goes on in schools in the Caribbean. And I know this one has always pained me, right? I see things being taught in some parts of the curriculum, like mathematics, for example, which I think is totally irrelevant to the modern needs of Caribbean citizens, right? So yes, I understand that the analytical part of it, but we have to bear in mind that it's not totally social media's fault. The other thing too is I did make the point that everybody has to take responsibility. And what I'm saying too is that personal responsibility must be in tandem with what the governments can do. So it's not just personal responsibility and we let everything flow. It must be in tandem with what the governments must do. Focusing on that, I want to say that education, and I made the point earlier, is extremely important. The one thing that we have for sure in the Caribbean, because it is enshrined in the laws and so on and so forth, is that every child must attend primary school and secondary school. Of course, there are students who fall through the cracks, and we know that, right? But by and all, almost everybody has to pass through the primary school and secondary school. And to me, that's where it starts. I spoke earlier about an education campaign. You can't obviously regulate people's personal, like, hey, you only get 3 hours a night and so on and so forth. But what you, not in a democratic society, certainly not like ours, right? And I don't want that at all. But what I'm saying is, we can invest heavily in an education campaign. I don't see, I mean, my background is communication and so on. In my mind, I think the ministries of education in the Caribbean, with some guidance, some curriculum, as I said, could implement education strategies that's suited and communicated in a way that will reach the students at the different levels, right? Hey, listen, it's important to set time limits. If you don't set social media time limits, you'll start to feel depressed. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm just throwing out things, right? You need to curate your feed, take a break, limit yourself. I mean, and these are things that you can do. And I think if you start from there, I don't think the problem is I don't think it's a short-term solution. But I do think that if you started at the level of the primary school, and I don't know if Sonia or Jason said, I mean, children now, they're growing up doing things on their tablets. I mean, you and I know about, I still take notes and then type out afterwards. Much of the children of my daughter who literally just goes on a tablet or laptop, which I can't do at all. So I understand. So we have to understand that, right? And we can start those education campaigns. To me, education is the end goal. It's the same thing with crime. I don't want to touch on too much on it, but I made this comment at a mini conference the other day that the one thing all criminals in Trinidad and Tobago have is that they would have at least attended primary school and secondary school. So something has to be going on there, or we're not addressing, or we're not picking up something there that causes them to go out and become criminals. And if you use that analogy, it's the same thing. Something has to go on at the primary school and secondary school by way of education. Maybe it might make sense. Let's just, apart from evaluating the curriculum, let's do something on social media. For forms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, standard 5, standard 4, whatever. Let's implement that. Let's take away some of the relevant stuff, and let's show them that. Even with AI, how we can use AI responsibly, right? Because let's face it, those things are things that we're going to meet. And I might sound like a repetitive duck, but as I said, education is the key to everything. And you can start it from as early as primary school and get children to understand. So even if they're not seeing it at home, Kamala, you made a very valid point, a very salient point. They don't have that environment that's nurturing and parents are supervising, but they could get it in school. Because all of them have to go to school. So start the education campaigns from there, curate your feed, take breaks, seek, things like that, and to me, that is the end of. But that must work in tandem with clinical, I want to use it with clinical and appropriate, with a clinical and appropriate regulatory framework.
Okay.
So
I accept that, Desmond, and I absolutely am taken, and I'm going to build on a point you made, that we are currently working with outdated curriculum. So what that tells me is that as adults, we have been failing the system anyway.
All right.
We are not taking the time to build the kinds of frameworks to intentionally groom our next generation for the kinds of outcomes we want. It's a hit and miss situation, and we are saying leave it to the next generation, they'll solve it, without preparing them to solve it. So that ball has to come right back in our court. What are we doing as the adults in our society to help ensure that we are putting the systems in place to give that next generation a fighting chance? And my argument is social media is doing the exact opposite of giving them a fighting chance. Social media has the potential to create zombies among our young people. And this is not a wild charge. So us here at CCGI, we have started an initiative for our small team that we call Lunch and Learn on a Friday. And one of the very first topics we looked at is for ourselves, how do we manage that time on social media? And so there was a big discussion here about how addictive it is, no matter what age you are. And therefore, how do you ensure you turn off these apps and notifications so that we all get a good night's rest? And so, and because this is something that is very well researched now, over the last 6 years, you go back and check, YouTube has lots of videos that points to the harm that social media is doing, the addictive nature that it exists. And so quite a few persons have in fact developed apps to fight it. So there's an app that would simply shut down your phone and allow you to tune off, okay? And those things will help. But let's come to what are the things we absolutely have control of as a society. How do we ensure we are informed enough and making the right decisions? Go ahead, Desmond.
No, well, as I said, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know Sonia obviously is not from Trinidad, so she would know, and I know Jason's a very young person, me not know. But you might remember there's a time, Kamla, in growing up, there was a Charlie campaign. Remember that Charlie campaign?
Oh, yes.
And that Charlie campaign was essentially revolved around keeping the environment clean. And I remember attending primary school, and that was the buzz.
Yes.
That was the buzz. Everybody, and when I look back, because I believe that Trinidad has fallen away since, but when I look back, I think that was a time where I saw Trinidad at its cleanest. You had children, hey, don't drop your litter there, and it was a whole big campaign. So my thing is the power of communications, you know, and within an education framework could do wonders. I don't see, I mean, and especially now, I mean, we have the tools to do it. We can run campaigns like that, and we could say, I don't necessarily, I mean, not to get into the technicalities of marketing and stuff, right? But I don't necessarily agree in telling them, okay, if you do this, this negative will happen. But actually, research shows that has a negative effect, the opposite effect. But what we can, but I do take your point, yes. But we could show them, hey, listen, you know, you can help yourself if you do less of this, or maybe if you and so on and so forth. So I think again, going back, education is key. And every time I think about some of the best campaigns that have ever been run, that I have ever seen in Trinidad, when I look back to my primary school days and I remember that Charlie campaign, everybody was doing it. It was, we didn't have many, we had probably only had one television channel at the time, and it used to be on all the time. We have the resources now to do it. I mean, all it requires is some brain work, some effort, and I think that is where it starts. I don't know how to shift off the platform, but education is something I think, and awareness is something that we have to do. No two bones about it. But we can't regulate. I mean, you can't regulate someone's personal life unless it's a parent, but the children have to go to school, and they do it. They're watching TV, and they're watching posters, and they're seeing what's around.
That's much more draconian than you. Sonia, I know you want to say something, but Jason.
Yes, I just want to add something to the same. It's just,
yes.
You know, the difference with this is that it is all about manipulating you, because it's all about that. Social media is how I can influence you, call it manipulate you to make a decision, whatever the decision is, whatever you need to take. And I think that's the hardest part, because it's how you need to educate people now to make decisions.
Mhm.
And in the past, you went and you research and you talk and you have to make decisions all your life. But now here is somebody is constantly making a decision for you. And how do you get that education where you learn how to make a decision based on your own criteria and not in the influence criteria? And
Mhm.
again, that applies to the kids, but to all of us. So
Yeah.
we buy more things than we ever used to buy, because now we see them in TikTok, we see them in Instagram, and there is a new restaurant there. Oh, there is, maybe before you will never even there, you will never go there. Now you do that. Has the positive part again, the social part, the community part, the nice part, but also is who is making the decisions for you. And I go to the point again, who owns the data and can influence the most are going to have the power. And I think there is where this particular aspect is hard, because it's so much influence and manipulation to you. And how, for me, the point is, how do we teach us and our kids to make decisions for your own and not for what you're seeing and getting influenced by whoever, companies, governments, anybody.
Yes, thank you, Sonia. Now, we are heading to the top of the hour, and we always have very interactive sessions here at CCGI. So I'm putting Novak on notice that I see he has made a very strong argument in the chat. So Novak, I'll be inviting you in a few minutes to share your thoughts with us. But Jason, I know that you wanted to respond just a few minutes ago. So
I just wanted to jump in very quickly about 2 points. First of all, Desmond, I love the point you raised about education being the cornerstone and the outdated nature of curriculums, not just in the Caribbean, but I think worldwide. I was having this discussion with a friend very recently where the concept of learning by rote no longer matters. And if it is that, I think as a institution, we retain on rote learning versus using technology as it exists today as a tool to teach people to do some skill. It doesn't necessarily need to be.
did we lose Jason?
The traditional, if you, oh, hello. Oh,
Yeah,
no.
okay, so you're back. It did
Okay,
just
fantastic. Sorry about that. But yeah, to think of learning any skill using social media specifically, and I'm going to use YouTube as my social media platform. If I want to learn to cook a new dish, or if I'm hungry and I look in my fridge, I need to make something tonight. I don't have time to have been trained traditionally. There are now apps that let you take a photo of your fridge and it will analyze using AI what you can make, how many people it serves, and every option that you'd want. That is a world that exists today. So to take any type of education, or rather, if it is that we're trying to build standards and values in a society, to use a rollout of social media in a controlled way. Let us call it the training wheel. So we haven't quite gotten to the horse or the car, but on a bicycle, you put on some training wheels so you don't fall too far left and too far right. That is something that parents can do today with parent accounts and children accounts, sub accounts. You can monitor both screen time, content moderation, you can filter out words. It's never going to be perfect. And eventually the kids are going to know, oh, this is all they did, and then turn it off. Eventually they will learn to, outpace everyone's ahead of them. And at that point in time, we kind of have to hope that we got a good foundation, or we have the safety nets for when there is, in fact, an issue that happens. As far as it becoming a personal responsibility for each individual, which it really is, it's going to be very hard to police that. I've never seen a working example of what that would really look like. In fact, the only thing I can draw for is a bit of science fiction. There's a show called Black Mirror. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it essentially gives a very dystopian view of how technology is going to take us. There's a particular episode called Nosedive, where people, not just services, are rated based on interactions. So you can go in, you can look at somebody, you can know how this person is just viewed by their peers generally. It seems harmless at first, and I won't spoil the episode, but it does eventually start to creep in that not everybody is treated evenly. Some people have this very manicured appearance. And what happens when you're just having a bad day? And then social media has the ability to dogpile on your very bad day, and everything just spirals. It is a massive question without solution. But if it is that we do use the tools that exist today, if we build a cornerstone of morality into us as a people, as well as into the platforms themselves, my phone will actually tell me every week, giving me a summary of how much my screen was on this week versus last week. Now I look at it every week and I say, okay, cool. And I note that and I kind of take it off. If I were to do something, if I were motivated to do something, to say, okay, this is my absolute limit, or what did I actually spend that time looking at? Was it just watching nonsense videos or doom scrolling versus spending that time to learn? Because my phone is a primary source of me doing research. I come back to my cooking tutorial there. It can be great. It is really just how it's going to be used, because ultimately, whether it be AI, whether it be the phones, it's going to boil down to tools, and tools can be both destructive or helpful. It's all about that, the hands of the wielder. So I kind of like that Kamla, Sonia, and Desmond are at the forefront, setting these kind of standards and policies, because it's going to make my job easier to help to maintain my kids or maintain my niece and nephew, my whomever is around me, to say, okay, I know that screen needs to turn off at X amount of time because the data having come in has said this is what's better for them. And I just set that as a policy. Perhaps I just download it and it automatically uploads to the kid's sub account. And oh no, Dad, it shut off. Really? That's strange. Perhaps we should read a book then and take it completely out of my hands so that I'm not the bad guy, because that's what everybody wants, to not be the bad guy. I think that especially when it comes to education and no longer relying on rote learning, I can actually get 7 sources broken down by a summary, and I can now look at it and say, do I trust this as a source? Is this matching up with the other sources that I found? And in fact, that's the one thing that I don't think we've touched on yet, which is the ability to gather information in a critical way quickly. In school, because I did grow up before the internet, we knew we had primary sources and secondary sources, and you needed to cite at least 3 authorities to make a case to pass a law school exam. I'm now able to do that on any social issue or any issue at all by saying, okay, here are the leading authorities. Let me get a Caribbean viewpoint. How has this been applied in a Jamaican context? And I'm able to scrape data a lot faster in the span of perhaps 2 hours to get to a standpoint of, this is what my research has led me to. I know my colleagues will also be kind of bringing a similar amount of data scraped using AI or however. And then we start to mash them together until we have a refined point. That's the whole point of the Socratic dialogue. And I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, it will level out, it will adjust itself to a net positive. Granted, those terrible horror stories still happen. But I'm all for a society where we just tell people, you need to educate yourself. No, I can send you a curated list and say, here's your actual reading list. If it is that you want to talk to me at this level, if you're not interested in talking to me at this level, okay, cool. And I can make a decision as to how I want to then interact with you. And that's kind of my stance on the last 2 contributions from my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Jason. I like that image that you have introduced. So not straight from the horses to the cars, but we're on bicycle with training wheels. And let us understand that as a society here in the Caribbean, we are pretty much like bicycles, and we need to put on the training wheels. And so as I invite Novak, if he is available and wish to contribute here, I'm going to invite him to speak. But Novak, I'm going to be extremely controversial and say to you, I will ban some platforms. I will, absolutely. As much as I believe in the greatness of freedom of speech, I also believe in the absolute need for responsibility. I also believe that it is important that as much as we get the benefits, and we are using one of those benefits here, just as Jason said, I can easily get so much of information on the internet, and some of it directly from social media. But there are platforms I will ban. So let's hear your argument, Novak.
All right, thanks for having me. And I know you're being the devil's advocate here. So I just want
No,
to start.
I seriously believe it. By the way, do you want to put on your camera? Because we do
I
have you.
am working from home, so I don't think I'm appropriately dressed. I just have on a t-shirt,
Fine.
but that's fine. Okay, so just to begin, thanks for giving me the mic and the opportunity to contribute to this discourse here. And I just want to start with two things. Our disclosure is that I am an ICANN fellow and I am a member of the Internet Society. So I advocate very strongly for an open internet, not just for economic reasons, but the fact that collectively technology has done so much for human society, and obviously it's a dichotomy. There are negative sides, but the positives outweigh the negative sides, right? So I just want to start by giving that particular disclaimer out of the way. The second thing is I'm going to use two real-life examples. A gunman walks into a crowded club and commits a hate crime against a particular community, whether it's a religious community, whether it's a lifestyle community. A gunman walks into a club and commits a crime. Guns aren't banned, the nightclub isn't banned. The second example I want to illustrate, traffic is a problem around the world. We need cars to get to where we're going. Cars cause traffic. We don't ban cars. So these are probably flawed analogies, right? But my point is that generally speaking, I agree that education is important, that internet addiction is a serious issue, a serious societal issue, but state-level censorship and platform banning, which is a nuclear bomb to tackle a particular issue, isn't the solution. Now, the list of countries that have implemented state-level censorship or platform banning, it's a very small list, and I posted it in the chat. We're talking about countries like North Korea, China, Saudi Arabia, Eritrea, Vietnam, Turkey, and a lot of these countries, the governments get involved in technology policy and abuse their powers. They do it to suppress political dissent. So they can claim misinformation, disinformation, but then they apply that to political dissent. So it is very easy for governments to abuse these powers. So my take is that government level, state level banning is not the solution. Content moderation is a potential solution, but also the individual responsibility. So as parents, you have the power to block the platforms in your home. As an organization, you have the power to block the platforms in your organization. But in the society, governments should not be given that power, that privilege to be able to say, no, you cannot do this. The government should not be able to say, no, you cannot drive your car to go to work. So again, I'm just using those simple analogies. Probably it isn't the best analogy. I just thought of it like 30 seconds ago. But I mean, I said that an open internet is a hill that I am planting my war flag on, and I would strongly advocate against any attempts by governments to introduce censorship or platform banning at that level. And I posted a link to an Internet Society document too. It goes beyond just the societal part of it. It has massive economic impacts. And as the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, I mean, responsible for corporate governance in the Caribbean, we have to understand that internet governance is its own discipline. They may have some overlap here, but this discussion is largely an internet governance discussion. So, I mean, I would encourage CCGI members to join some of the Internet Society sessions, to join some of the Trinidad and Tobago Computer Society discussions, because I think you'll get a broader worldview of not just the technology side of it, but the policies around the openness of the internet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Novak. I do sincerely appreciate that contribution. I like the examples, as Jason pointed out. These are non-democratic countries that you mentioned that would have engaged in banning some of the platforms. So, Jason, I see your hand up. Let's get your take, please.
Well, in fact, I really wanted to ask Novak specifically about the X ban and perhaps what has happened in France with Telegram. how is it that we would treat with a platform that has been asked questions that they then just resile from? Because as we've all here said, wide banning, nobody's on board for that. We want moderation, we want regulations, we want a soul to it. And part of getting that is to actually have people, responsible people, actually accountable, not just for their own personal use, but also the platforms themselves to say, we've designed it in this particular way. Your staunch plan, where you say we should have an open internet. How do we deal with bad actors or people that are hiding behind a facade? I don't mean to try and open it back up again, but I'd really love to hear your take on that one.
Yeah.
So okay, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that in real life or on online platforms, you do have bad actors to deal with, right? So what the European Union has been doing is a pretty good model where they've introduced fines. So the EU hasn't necessarily banned the iPhone, for example. They said, look, we need you to have this particular feature functionality for these reasons, or you are facing fine. And the EU to get Apple to give up the Lightning port for USB-C port is huge in terms of hardware. So the fact is there are mechanisms to get there. I'm not going to pretend that I know all the solutions, but I think content moderation is a very important point. And one of the things that I've been lobbying for is we have a new tool on the market called artificial intelligence. AI has this capability, of course, through fine-tuned models to moderate content in real time. Now, that is fundamentally different from censorship that I planted my flag on, right? But of course, if we do have guardrails in place to say, look, certain types of hate speech, certain types of content, which would be mutually agreed on, is not allowed on the platform, and we have the technology to get to the point of automated near real-time moderation, it would solve some of the issues. Now, in Brazil, I've read bits and pieces of it, so I'm not going to pretend to know the entire story, but I do know that one of the other voices in the corner is saying that the judge who was tasked with holding X responsible has also been accused of choosing particular individuals to suppress their voices on the platform. So they were potentially abusing the powers assigned to them to suppress political dissent. And if you look at the condemnation of the X ban in Brazil, across the world, look at some of the arguments of the people who are condemning this particular action. You would see some of the stories that are coming out, and coincidentally, a lot of these stories are unfolding on social media. A lot of them are being fact-checked in real time as the conversation is happening, which is one of the benefits of social media. So it's a dichotomy, there is good, there is bad. We do need to find this middle ground, and I think that education and individualistic actions, and again, if addiction is a problem with children, it needs to start at home with education, with responsible parenting, with controlling access to devices, with controlling access to the internet. Now, many of these platforms have terms and conditions of service. YouTube, I think, is 13. Facebook is 13. Parents ignore that, give the child a phone, give them a Facebook, Instagram, YouTube access, which is in violation of the platforms. So the platforms came up with rules and regulations to protect these groups, but people are making the active decisions to ignore some of these guardrails and accepting the risk, and then they would go on and say, well, YouTube is showing my child pornography. Well, your 6-year-old child, really, I don't think it's supposed to be on YouTube. I might be getting the figures wrong, but I think you all get the point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Novak. And I think a very important point you made there when you discussed the ban was the reasons behind it in Brazil. And one of it was related to disinformation with respect to the election process in Brazil. Now, if it's one thing I know to stay out of, is politics. In no country are you going to find the vast majority of people having that ability to look at both sides of the coin and come up with a rational perspective. I think people just lose their minds when it comes to politics. And therefore, that is just going to have a very minor part of my consideration when I look at the overall picture of the use of social media and its implications in society. And as we are having the conversation, I think it's important for us to look at this in its entirety, not social media per se in a vacuum, but the context in which it is occurring within our society. So we have a bigger responsibility to help develop the kind of environment that we want to have if we are going to use the social media responsibly. So you know what? I will ban some of these platforms altogether. I will. I wouldn't ban LinkedIn. I'll definitely ban X or Twitter.
I was gonna ask Kamla if we could get the list from you of the ones that you're gonna ban, or if you're gonna hold that close to the chest. Because you've said it a couple of times now.
Yes, no, because again, if we are on training wheels, there needs to be very clear restrictions. And we have to build the maturity. We have to build the critical thinking, the analytical thinking. We need to reach that place where we are having this conversation that we are having, but on a wider forum, where together as countries in this region, we are charting that direction rather than feeling that we are being tossed around. And whatever happens at the end, we just pray that destiny is going to take us in a good place.
I can add something there because I think this is a very, very valid point. I think we as a society needs to go back into principles, values, and it's like you do with companies, correct? You define a strategy, you define your principles and values, you define your path towards those values and towards those objectives. And I think part of that is what we have to do as society. And that's why I think all of us also agree on that there has to be a collective work, correct? Has to be education, government, platform owners. How can we do? Because I think, say, we are going to ban, that would also take out all the benefits that we're getting out of this platform we know there are a lot. And again, we are not going to stop driving cars, or we are not going to stop doing a lot of things because, yes, there is positive things, is negative. Is how can we find that? And again, for me, the point of the regulators is important. Regulators were built not to be owned by the government. Regulators were done there to make the life of the citizens better. So that's why regulator regulate telecom, regulator electricity, regulator. So that's where we intended. The challenge we're having with these regulators is who is influencing the regulators. Because again, I come to my point is, who own the data and made the decisions is the ones who are going to drive. And if this is political driven, as we know, then yes, I fully agree with Novak in that what type of filtering of information is going to be there. So you lead some of countries like China, etc., all the information, again, what they're trying to insinuate for you, to try to manipulate you, is in what they think you should do and you should think. So yes, I agree, if that's the way the information is going, there is no anymore about building or creating, is about what I want you to know, and that's all you are allowed to know. So I think that part of this coherent working together as what are the principles of the values, and then put that back down to families, to the education system, it is what we're missing. And we're missing this not only for social media, for all aspects of our lives, that we are so focused on the economic growth and all that, that all that principles and values are getting out. I mean, when I went to school, I have ethics as part of my curriculum, a lot of things that, how do you behave in the streets? How do you answer a phone? A lot of things that for me were like, yeah, this is normal behaviors, but you don't have that anymore. So I think it's the combination of that, like companies, that what the strategy, what is that we want our society to be, and then create those environments in the complete society, because we all are part of that society and we all influence in that society. And I think that's where we're not doing anymore. That consensus of what is that we want to be as a society. So everybody is building their own, constructing, and then you get these platforms who make it easier because, as I told before, globalization is there. So before I could reach a small group, so the damage was here. Now I just can boom, put it. But at the same time, the benefit is also there. So I just understand your point of the negative side, but I don't want us to forget that there is also good things out of this social media that are there. And we give the example of YouTube cooking, quick researching, things that we did before take us longer time, we can achieve it now in a shorter time. There is that principles and values and where we want this society to be that I think is we don't have anymore. And we losing all that part in our societies to the point that now we don't have a kind of a guidance. So everybody's exposed to whatever, and then you do the things you do using those tools.
Yeah, I just want to endorse what you all hear me, right? Sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Desmond.
Yeah, I just want to endorse what Sonia said, because it's interesting. Like, this is not my first time having this kind of discussion. And one of the things I always find, it always seems to be social media is blamed for the ills that we see present in society, where I see it a little different. I think social media may have exacerbated what is there already. I mean, really and truly in Trinidad and Tobago, we didn't see the full fight of social media as we know it now until probably early 2000s. Am I correct? I mean, at least in the mainstream society. But our society at that time were already showing signs of some kind of falling out. Crime started to increase. I have a laptop, I could research statistics and show you how, the crime, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago increased, right? We could see that it's starting in the early 2000s and so on. You started to see endless incidents of school violence, things like that. You understand what I'm saying? So I want us to be careful, right? Because I don't think social media really is the problem. But as Sonia hinted to, or at least that's what I think she tried to do, is really a bigger problem, which is that our society, we have to go back and address some of these concerns. And so the real question is, simultaneously with how we're going to regulate in a sensible way social media, bearing in mind that we as individual countries in the Caribbean can't really do anything. I heard Novak talk about fines, but I think if Trinidad and Tobago to say, okay, we're gonna fine Twitter X. I don't even think that's going to be a bother to them, and they're going to come. But I take his point. It's a valid point. We have to find ways and means before we get to that banning, right? But I'm saying we also have to address the other concerns, and you can't have this discussion without talking. I mentioned one thing that was the outdated curriculum, and that's just one thing. There are plenty of other things as well. So I just want us to be careful. My thing is that social media, yes, it probably gave it to exacerbate the situation, but the situation was already there. The society was already starting to burst at the seams,
Yes, absolutely agree, Desmond. And that's why it's so important for us to be the adults in the room and begin to have the conversation and to recognize all the many areas we have fallen short in crafting the type of society we want. So we need to walk down that road. Now, I'm going to ask Dr. Charlene Sharp to share some of her thoughts. She's been putting some very interesting comments in the chat. But even as I asked Charlene to unmute, and Charlene is one of our directors here at CCGI. She's from Jamaica. So we are happy to have her share if she's able to unmute. And I'm also going to say to our participants in the room, we are happy to have you contribute to the conversation as well. Just let us know if you have a comment that you want to share. You can put it in the chat or just raise your hand and we'll invite you in. So, Charlene, are you able to unmute and share your thoughts? Okay, I think Charlene just exited the room, so she's not going to be able to share, but there are two comments. I'm just going to read them out very quickly. She said, great discussion, team. Who is the gatekeeper? And this is a critical question for us. Who is the gatekeeper? Are we going to be the gatekeeper, or are we going to leave it to Big Brother, someone else way out of our reach who has no care for us, to be that gatekeeper? She said, I think social media is fast becoming the main agent of socialization for our societies. And I agree 100%. And who is on social media? And what are they socializing us to be? She said, when I was a child, the primary agents of socialization were the family, school, etc. And they were responsible for the passing on the culture, the values, the mores. Social media has taken over that role without the necessary boundaries to ensure no harm is done. Being addictive has only complicated the challenge. And we have to understand the reality of that. Huh? Social media is addictive. It is designed to be addictive. And so her comment that she shared just a short while ago was that at the heart of this discussion is the values and attitudes concern. Whose values and whose attitudes should prevail, given the pluralistic nature of the society? This is very contentious. I agree with her. She said the elitist view no longer rules. It is critical for us to have this conversation. And whilst I agree with Novak in that there need to be an open internet, I would 100% agree with an open internet. It levels the playing field globally. But there need to be a certain amount of responsibility in us understanding that we cannot simply be victims of those with the money and influence. Those who, as Sonia keeps saying, who controls the data, controls the world. So am I going to be a hapless victim? Desmond, I'm not going to agree that in Trinidad and Tobago, we can't really do anything. We can do better. We need to do better. And the best way to do this is for us to have this conversation and talk about what is the society we want to groom. How do we ensure that our young people are growing and building critical thinking skills so that they're not easily influenced and manipulated? Jason, I see you're bursting.
I'm going to jump into Desmond's defense here real quick. And in truth, my view is this. The best model that we've ever seen was Twitter 2021. This is when we were, or leading into the US political or presidential election, where there were live fact-checking. Community notes, I think, were the strongest model. As we've sat here and we've spoken all day, this morning and this session, I've kind of thought, what would my ideal model of content moderation look like? And I keep coming back to that one. Perhaps we'd need to have it where country by country, you could break down the metrics of the community notes, that this is what is normal and obtains culturally in one jurisdiction should not be blasted by another one. And if somebody's posting something that doesn't align with this people's way of life, then they could say, please note that the original poster XYZ. Perhaps that is kind of the training wheels I'm talking about, because eventually, as we adopt these things, they will become more and more normal. To say, okay, I've heard one person's opinion. I also wanted to just jump in quickly about what Charlene had said, to say that social media now removes the tools, or rather the unfair hierarchy that some people have. And actually, my experience is quite different. I can have an account on all of these platforms, and I can be posting what my truth is, and let me say it that way. What my, I don't want to use the word facts because that is also politically driven, but my point of view here, and I really just might be shouting into the ether. To create a following, to become popular, is necessary to become influential on these platforms. So we do have a question as to who are the loudest people in the room? Why are they the loudest? Does this particular person match up to the values, the standards of education to run the campaign that Desmond wants us to come back to? And then perhaps we can then say, okay, I've endorsed, their view on these things, but also the nature of people is I'm going to disagree with you somewhere along the line. And that doesn't necessarily make you a bad actor. It just may mean that my viewpoint here doesn't match up to theirs. We haven't really touched on it, but another issue that has happened with social media is the concept of canceling, why people are canceled, how they're canceled and such. And they can disagree with me or catch me in a moment of youthful indiscretion, something that happened 10 years ago. They come and bring it back up, and my entire life, the concept of fame is now put on normal people. And are normal people prepared to deal with what the fallout of that is without getting, the money to then pay the therapist to try and say, okay, a million people were mean to me today, and it really gets to me. I mean, if a million people are saying something to you and your phone is just exploding. Yeah, that is the downside of social media, along with the free speech. So as far as a workable model, because I think that's where we're now into in this discussion, I would throw that one out there. Because that's essentially what a lot of the content creators that I follow like, where they're saying, this is just a discussion. I'm posing a question to you. Let's talk about it in the comment section below. And let us see if we cannot drill down to this is really my refined position after having come up with a sharpening stone, which is your vantage point. And if as a society or as a planet, we can agree that that is how online discussions are, then I think we'd have actually accomplished the next evolution.
I just want to just backtrack and put some context. When I said we can't do anything, what I meant in the context was of holding platforms accountable. Jason made the brilliant point that really and truly X wasn't just banned like that. They just refused. At some point in time in the discussion, they just decided, look, we're not going to show any kind of representation again. Of course, the courts went that way. And then they decided to ban. So, and then it came up again. I think Novak talked about bad actors, or is it Jason? I can't remember. Talk about what happens if somebody, because part of that regulatory framework will involve at some point interacting with these companies. So what I meant, not that Trinidad can't do anything, but if your whole platforms are accountable, we need to do it as a body. Trinidad and Tobago cannot do it alone. The Caribbean region has to come together. As you rightly put it, there's strength in numbers, right? They're not going to, you're better able to hold the companies accountable. So it was in that context I meant that Trinidad can't really do anything to that extent. But I do think that Trinidad, like governments, individual governments can do things. I mentioned the campaigns. There are numerous other things. There are numerous other things that we could look at. So it was in that context that I made this statement.
Understood, Desmond, and fully taken on board. And because change is so important, but change in which direction? And how do we then come to that common ground in terms of if we want to act collectively, how are we acting and in what direction? So I'm going to say this in the context of something that Novak just shared again in the chat. He said, I just also want to mention that banning does not achieve much at the ground level because there are always mechanisms to circumvent it. Even in Eritrea, guess that's a country, where there is a national internet lockdown. Information is like water. It finds a way out. And okay, fine, but let me tell you something. If you're doing something that's harmful to me, I am not just opening my door and telling you come in. You have to find a way to come at me. So if that is what is required in order for there to be some thoughtful consideration in how we move forward, then I'm prepared to walk that road. But here's what. I am an eternal optimist. I believe that we can do great things. I believe that as people, we go through all these convulsions, but in the end, we do find our way. It takes courage and it takes time. Let's look at how this world has evolved. You know, 100 years ago, I couldn't possibly sit on this platform. I couldn't sit on any platform as a woman to lead any charge. 150 years ago, half the world was subjected to slavery and some form of subjugation. As human beings, we've been able to deal with all of those social issues. We have grown in tremendous ways. We are now at that point where we again facing something that's likely to disintegrate our societies, to take away from us the opportunity to set those value systems and mores that's ours. And so it's important for us to be able to have that awareness. Let's start with that because it's an evolved area. You know, Novak also spoke about artificial intelligence, and we know that this is on the cusp of breaking out into a whole new era. How is it going to impact us? It helps if we look at what the implications are. We need to set those standards and we need to be prepared to make the tough decisions to ensure that our societies are groomed in the way that we want.
I will say that one of the difference, and I had this discussion before also on transformation, is that the only difference we see with evolution in the past is that it's really much, much faster. It's really going faster and faster and faster. So before we took a little bit of time, you know, on the transition and everything, but now it's what I tell people when they tell me what we need to transform. I say the world is changing every second. So if you see what happened yesterday and what happened today, I can guarantee you that there is so much evolution that there is no time anymore to take the time. And I think that's where we are no faster responding. And I'm talking about regulations again, governments, evolutions are taking too long. So all these environments that are moving so fast are taking over so quickly that that's where is a little bit of disconnection between the speed of the transformation led by technology and the ability that you have now to do things quicker and the way we act, especially, I will say now, this is very to the Caribbean, we're very slow in responding. And if we talk about governments, laws, regulation, we're so slow. So we consolidate in the picture that a lot of the damage has happened and a lot of the good things has happened. But this is, I think, an aspect to consider is how we internally or how the governments internal are built to respond to this quick change. It's not anymore, you have a lot of time, you have a year, you have a year. No, this is a day-by-day change. So you have today something, tomorrow something else, out of that somebody build on top of, and that is changing. So I think that's another aspect that, as we discussed before, principle values, but it's also the speed are we responding, how long it's taking, how bureaucratic are we in our governments to respond to this constant change.
That's a brilliant point, Sonia. It requires us to constantly be open and having dialogue so that we know what's happening, because you can only respond to things that you are aware of and that you are building the capacity and the ability to respond to. So I see Devanand Tilakson has shared a very strong point in the chat. Devanand, is it okay if I ask you to unmute and join our conversation and let's hear your argument for the right to the information that you get on social media. Are you able to unmute?
Thank you very much. Are you hearing me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, it's, and I'm multitasking here. So, but the general point I wanted to say is that, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of content on social media, and there were the opinions of even the owners of of X, Twitter, and so on, because I find it offensive. I don't like it, but I just want to say that, you know, and while I will be offended by it, I don't want to be denied my right to be offended by such opinions, because I think because I think there's a risk here of okay, I don't like this person's opinions and so on. I just want to put a blanket over it and not see it. And that's not really dealing with the issues. That's just putting it out of sight. And I fear that's what a lot of times that's what we want to do. We just want to throw a blanket over it and we don't want to see issues like child violence. We don't, you know, somebody's posted a video about this. Oh, we shouldn't have that on the network. So they're throwing a blanket on it, but they're not really tackling the issues, what happened there. And and I just want to emphasize also that what the other panelists have been saying, you know, education is really important. Parental responsibility is very important. And you know, you're not compelled to use the social networks. You can ban yourself and you ban your immediate family that you're responsible for. Hey, I don't want you using this until you're old enough to understand the implications of what it is. You should be careful what you post, because you know it could be used against you in the future. Those types of things. So digital literacy is super important. It should be part of the school curriculum, I think. So that's broadly what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Devanand. And so underscoring again the point of digital literacy and why it's so important for us to ensure that young people too are aware of the implications of social media, because we agree there are lots of benefits, but then the harm that can also obtain, it's important for us to discuss. And I guess to a great extent, our response may be based on where exactly we sit. As a parent, of course, if my young people are younger than 18, none of which are at the moment, I would say, but definitely if they were younger, it's absolutely within my control to speak to what is the environment that I want them to have in my house. But then let's remember, when they go to school, it's an entirely different environment that they are at, right? Let's look at reality. Also, as the CEO of an organization, I want to grow what is the value system that is adhered to. What is the culture that we want for our organization? And so, yes, I may want to put restrictions that then allows me to set the context that I want. But then if I am sitting at a higher level, which allows me to influence society as well, shouldn't I similarly have a responsibility in talking about what are the value systems that we want as a society that gives us access to that information to be able to quickly respond? Because that is how dangerous a lot of how social media is developing now. So I want us to keep in mind, and we are just heading, you know, to the last 15 minutes of today's discussion. It's so important for us to look at it from all of these angles to determine how it is we move forward. Now, we have mentioned that there would always be bad actors. And I want to share, there was a model I was introduced to by, it was Jerome Chambers, who was one of our facilitators at a workshop here for the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. And he was talking about ethics. And he said there's this model that research shows that 20% of people will always find a way to do wrong things. There's a 20%, no matter what you do, no control system in place. And those are our bad actors. He said there's another 20% that will never think of doing something unethical. That 20% with the discipline and self-control and the deeply ingrained value systems and principles that, you know, I will not do certain things. And then the remaining 60% are those people, he says, that you need to always be reinforcing what is the behaviors you want. And you do this by developing the policies, putting control mechanisms in place and all those things. If we apply that concept to our society as a whole, so we have influencers, 20% of whom would use the platform for good, with intention that it is to build a better society. And we would have 20% who is there only for whatever insidious outcome they want. And the 60% that now can be influenced, given the opportunity, and there are a lot of incentives for persons to go on social media and do what it takes to attract attention. Jason referred to it a little bit when he said, as an influencer, how do I build my following? You know the fastest way to build your following? Do something negative or controversial. And so let's talk about what are those solutions that's acceptable to all of us. I am all for freedom of speech, but I'm also equally all for responsibility in that freedom. And in taking responsibility for us to help craft that environment to grow the society for the outcomes we want 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the next generation. Can we do that?
I think for me, as looking at the time and the conclusion is what I say in the beginning. For me, it has to be a balance, because there are benefits and there are things that are not as good. And I think we need to find that balance. Now, as a society, then we have to come, and again, this is more a wider scope, is what is that we want to achieve. And I think from there, you need to create some boundaries and some guidelines, and then have all these entities, correct? So governments, platform owners, persons, individuals, societies, trying to find a way to do this. So we cannot leave it to one or to the other. And I think Jason was saying that about how Twitter was before. You mentioned LinkedIn. So we see that there is a way somehow to have that compromise, but I think it has to be a society compromise in impacting the social media, but also, as said by Desmond, it is more than that. It's not only social media, it's the overall context of the society. And I think it is, if we're able to find that, then we will be able to guide more those kind of, and again, it's not about speaking about, I want you to speak about. It is about we talk about freedom of speech, is about being able to share, being able to put your own opinions with respect, and to be able to interchange ideas, because that's actually how ideation works and how you grow as a society. There is many aspects, many ideas, you put all of them together and then you get to the next level. But I think that will be my conclusions out of today. It's just, I think it's a balance, and how we get that balance is where I need a lot of actors get involved. And that's part is what I think we're not doing quick enough. So the platform owners, the societies, the kids that has the ability to learn so quickly are winning the battle now, because we are just taking too long to come with that guidance and boundaries.
If I may, hello, you hear me, right? Sorry, it's raining here and I'm close to the bamboo, so I don't know if you're hearing me.
No, we're hearing you clearly. Thanks, Desmond. Go ahead.
All right. Yes, Sonia made some very interesting points. I will start by saying what I said at the beginning. It starts with education. I don't necessarily mean education in schools. I mean overall education. The other thing, and I have in my mind, I have some ideas of how that should go, which I'll articulate momentarily, right? The other thing is we speak very loosely about values, bonds, and so on and so forth. But I think we have to clearly, because before you could go back and try to put things in place so that we can get society to respect and understand those sorts of values, we have to understand what sorts of values that we want. And when we talk values, for example, there are many things: anti-bullying, environmental protection and initiatives, equality and justice. We have to figure out what values exactly that we want that might be appropriate for where we're going to or where we want the Caribbean to go to. Once we figure that out, that's where the education starts, because then you can start to build out campaigns, institutions, NGOs, like institutions like yours, like this, the CCGI, which I think this is a much needed discussion, right? I've had this discussion in silos in different places and so on, but you never see anything to this extent where it involves different people from the Caribbean, right? And then when you have, so that's on one front. The next thing, the government has to play its part, and the individual governments have to play its part by integrating values education into schools. I know currently that there's a move where they're telling teachers that they should try to incorporate it in the curriculum. I don't think so. I think teaching values should be something that's dedicated. It should be, I don't know what subject you're going to, a long time to call it civics, I think. When I was in primary school, I think it was civics. I can't remember, right? But maybe we need to go that way. Within the awareness and within the awareness and the communication and the education campaigns, of course, you need to promote family involvement, right? You need to go, just as how politicians do it when they have election time, they're killing us every single week with town hall meeting here, there, cottage meeting here, there, and everywhere. This is something that we could do with values, right? The media, we can engage the media. So, I mean, I work in the media too. So, I mean, to me, it's not difficult or inconceivable to craft something around going back to values and this, that, the other, and so on and so on. And now we have tools to do it. It might seem like a contradiction, but you could use social media as well. I know Jason will agree with that, right? And those are little things. So for me, I will always be harboring on the point of education. Again, not just necessarily in education in schools, but we need to build that awareness. I have seen it done with certain things in this country already. I've seen it done in other places like Guyana and Barbados and so on and so forth. And these are things that we could do collectively. We're doing that while we're making representation to CARICOM, where we want to have a regulatory framework that suits us, right? That stops short of banning any social media platforms, but certainly putting things in place. Novak talked about how we can moderate content, etc., etc. So all of these things cannot be addressed as individual symptoms. They have to be addressed in tandem with each other. Yeah.
Absolutely, Desmond. I totally agree. A holistic approach that's needed that looks at what is the value system and how do we encourage that. So I'm really loving a lot of what we are coming up to in this conversation. So Jason, yes, let's hear your concluding thoughts.
Final words. I have sat here and I've mulled over the notion of banding together, kind of like CARICOM, which is the point Desmond was making. And I had found the statistics coming out of 2023, released from Statista, not a site I'm familiar with, so I don't claim, but they're saying that we have a population in the Caribbean of about 664 million. That's 664 impressions. That makes a dent in the bottom line of any tech company. So there is collective bargaining that we can utilize. And perhaps we can help bridge the divide, Desmond. I'll represent Jamaica, you can represent Trinidad. We'll find the other representatives that we can help this effort. I also looked at very quickly a note that Kamala had made as to how to build a following, and I looked at who the most followed people on X are right now. It starts off with Elon Musk, then we have Barack Obama, Cristiano Ronaldo, which is actually an interesting story, where he grew a YouTube page to 1 million followers in an hour and a half, something that's never been done. Only he could do that because he already had a following. So he didn't come from nothing. But it is interesting that at the very least, two of the three names, and I won't point out which two I'm referring to, are very positive people. And so perhaps there is a hope that we can get positive influences and such. The fifth most followed person is Rihanna, so big up the Caribbean. And the last point I'd like to share, perhaps, and it is a ridiculous suggestion, but we're trying to think outside of the box, is we have annual competition, beauty pageants and such, where we elect people to represent our nations. Perhaps we need to start having tastemaker pageants where we curate, what are your stances on these social issues? Can you lead our children in a discussion? Perhaps that might be a viable thing and even a new sector that people could say, we're going to endorse these morals. I build my platform on these morals. Let me be your 2024 tastemaker for Jamaica. And then I would have an in with these social tech companies to say, verify my account. Let me put a community note that has a particular star on it. And when people say, well, who is this person? No, that's the one they elected. That's their representative. Next year we get somebody else in. They've gone radical on this side and we further fine-tune. It's crazy. It may be dumb, but it's a thought.
I love the idea. I absolutely love the idea, Jason.
Because... Desmond, you have my vote for first year representative.
Because what that does is it creates a very intentional forum for us to discuss what are the values that we all want to embrace. What are we promoting? So that we help craft what that society looks like. So I think we've had a really great conversation here today as we look at the implications of social media. Clearly, my friends are not too much in favor of banning. I retain my stance. If there are no controls, if we don't act, then if my choice is between the very awful beheading and the kind of very negative, destructive things that can happen, if my choice is between that and Jason being able to put his app in the fridge and have a very quick tutorial on what he can cook, I will say, Jason, no. Go find the kitchen and find a cooking book. Because it can't be so extreme. We need to be able to have, and it is what some of the platforms are doing that Novak spoke about, and that is content moderation. We have to remember that 20% of people would be focused on doing harm. And we do need to have the guardrails in place. And we have 60% of the people who can very easily be influenced one way or the other. Do we have the strong enough influence to pull them in the direction that we want them to go? And another thing that was mentioned briefly as part of this conversation, and this is that social media today makes it that a young person can do some act when they're pretty much still growing and learning. And that one action can come back to haunt them in their adult life. Is that acceptable? Shouldn't we as a society recognize that humans can make mistakes and that it's okay to make mistakes and that forgiveness is a part of what we do rather than hold one black spot up and then bully that person, into depression or whatever else. Those are the kinds of conversations we need to have. That's the level of critical thinking that we would want for the next generation to engage in as naturally as how they do other things. So I'm so happy and pleased. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Those of us who join us in the Zoom room as participants. Many thanks to those of you who join us on the live stream here as well. We've been live on YouTube and also on our LinkedIn page. Jason, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you took this challenge and agreed to come on and share your perspective. Some really food for thought that you gave to us this morning, so I appreciate it. Sonia, was such a wonderful thing having you from Belize with us this morning. I think you really started the conversation in a good way by, dissecting what are the key areas in which we can address these concerns. And it really has helped to shape the conversation today. We look forward to having more of you at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. And Desmond, you have brought so many important considerations to the forefront here for us. The recognition that we have failed in many respects already, and therefore just looking at social media and trying to have that focus is not going to get us where we want to be. It's important for us to see how we have to address, it's a multi-pronged approach. We have to create a society in a particular way in order for us to respond responsibly to the social media challenge. So there's a lot of work for us to do. And so we at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, I'm going to make a shameless plug now. I'm going to ask all of you, join us and be members of this institute. We are a non-profit organization, but we are a membership organization. We currently have members not just from here in Trinidad and Tobago. We proudly have members from Jamaica, from Barbados, from Guyana, from Belize, from the British Virgin Islands, from St. Lucia, from St. Martin, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we are bringing persons from the region closer together. It's allowing us to be able to have those shared perspectives that we can help influence the way in which our society is growing. So join us. It's going to be a great time if we take the time to do this right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm going to be returning in a half hour with our governance live segment. My guest is Irma Harrington. And my focus is how he would have built an organization that's now celebrating 20 years, and his focus was a value system. So those of you who could join us on the live stream, please do so as well. And beyond that, have a wonderful rest of Friday and weekend ahead. And we'll see you again soon for another session here at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute.
Bye.
Bye.